Today's story is of Warren Jeffs, a man who still to this day believes he is the prophet of God and who has led all the followers of the fundamental Church of Latter-day Saints into believing that too. Unfortunately, this is the story of someone who has too much power, and because of that power, he was able to get away with doing some truly horrific things. Here's his story.
We were kept secluded from the outside world. We didn't go to public school. We didn't watch movies. We didn't have magazines. We didn't watch television. Everything about our lives were very much centered around our belief system.
Growing up as a daughter of Warren Jeffs was kind of like royalty in a way, but also you had a lot more pressure to be like perfect. The things we did for fun is basically just playing in the mud, but then when Father told us that we couldn't play games anymore, then it kind of got a lot more narrowed down to just little things that we had to learn to enjoy.
Warren was born 8 weeks premature on December 3rd, 1955. His mother, Marilyn Steed, believed him to be close to death, but had a vision of past prophets coming to her. In this vision, they revealed to her that Warren would survive, and this made her believe that his life would become incredibly special.
So much of my childhood, we were always told about the end of the world was coming, because that's what the prophet was saying is the days are short. The Lord is going to send destruction down upon the earth, and then he's going to save his faithful people. And then after everything else that is evil is destroyed, then they will be able to go and create this utopia that was called Zion.
Warren's father, Rulon Jeffs, was the president of the Fundamental Church of Latter-day Saints, or FLDS, an extreme sector of the Church of Latter-day Saints that believe in polygamy, and specifically having at least 3 wives will bring you to the highest degree of glory in heaven.
Me and my family, Warren Jeffs' family, all 132 of us, I think, lived in Texas in this big ranch called the YFC Ranch until about 2012. He had several wives that were like under the age of 18, like a lot of them. So my mom is the 8th wife, and she was barely 19 when she was married, so she wasn't one of the child brides. So I was never presented as someone being like a young girl, but I was told to prepare for marriage when I was like right before I turned 12, I think.
However, in 1986, when Rulon Jeffs became president of the FLDS, he established the one-man rule doctrine that altered the leadership structure of the church. Instead of being one of the 7 priests, Rulon referred to himself as a prophet, the one true prophet, the prophet of God. He made his followers believe that he was the representative of God on earth, and whatever revelations he had or directions given had to be followed by each and every member, because it was a direct command from that man up in the sky. He often told his followers that he was immortal.
We would wake up first thing in the morning, and everyone in the family home would gather for prayer, and we would read all different kinds of scriptures from the Book of Mormon. And then we would get up, go to school, and immediately the first thing that we would have in school was more religious teachings. We would have our morning class, which was all centered around studying the Book of Mormon, as well as preaching from the principal, who was Warren Jeffs.
Rulon joined the FLDS when he was 28 years old, and over the course of his time in the church, it was rumored that he had at least 60 wives. Marilyn Steed was the 4th wife of Rulon's and became a favored wife because of her son Warren and the vision she had had with the prophets in him. She really pushed for all her sons to be closer to Rulon so that they could be the next leaders of the church. But both Rulon and Marilyn continued to treat Warren differently, believing him to be special.
Basically, the only reason that Father got powerful in the first place was fear. So my father went to prison when I was 3.5 years old, I think. He went to prison for as an accomplice. He some 12-year-old girls that he married. I was 15 years old the day that Mom told me that basically everything I ever knew was a lie, that my father wasn't the prophet, wasn't like the God, he wasn't on a pedestal like we put him on.
Rulon was president of the FLDS and prophet for 16 years, and although he had claimed to be immortal, he passed away in 2002. At the time of his passing, Rulon had 23 confirmed wives. Because Warren had been raised with the intention of leading, at his father's funeral, he started exercising his authority and told all of Rulon's wives that they had to wear white, and he wouldn't let his other 62 siblings stand next to the casket. Only he was allowed. In the weeks after Rulon's passing, Warren began speaking as if he was his father renewed. He said his father had assumed his body, and he claimed that he was now the prophet. No one in the church wanted to go against the person who had a direct line to God, so they believed him. As the new president and prophet, Warren was the only person in the FLDS church with the authority to perform marriages. He was also responsible for assigning wives to husbands.
Behind closed doors, it was so hard. There was extreme sexual and domestic abuse. I would be forcibly required to fulfill my marital duties, as they would be said to me. And I would just lay there and stare at the ceiling and just count as high in my numbers as I possibly could so that I could check out of what was happening.
Warren decided to marry all but 2 of his father's wives. The reason he didn't marry those 2 women was because one refused and therefore was not allowed to marry at all, and one was able to flee. Wait. This is so wild. So all these other women were okay with marrying their son?
In the culture of the FLDS, women are basically property because all marriages are arranged through the prophet. Usually it was up to the father to decide when he felt like they were ready.
Warren was living in Short Creek, a small town straddling the border of Arizona and Utah. Short Creek was made up entirely of FLDS members. And because it was rare that anyone outside the church had any contact, the people of the church were only educated with what was available and provided to them. They believed what was told to them because there was no information available to tell them otherwise.
We were very watched over, I guess. There was one man, didn't have to be related to us, but he was always the caretaker over the house of hiding. There had to be a man watching over us at all times because we were women. We were so precious, or whatever. That's what Father would always tell us. He would send several messages saying we were so precious and that we couldn't be seen by the Gentile world because we were too pure. And then the next day he'd send a message, you people are evil. So it was really hard to understand what to believe.
Women believed their only purpose was to serve their husbands. Marrying was a privilege many young girls couldn't wait to have. Every good woman was to serve her male counterpart unconditionally. In a sense, the wife belonged to her husband, as if she was an inanimate object and not a person.
I'm being educated through rape, then having religious leaders in my life who are furthering that education, and just instead of hearing me and protecting me, they were sending me back with words such as, you go home and you obey and you submit yourself to your husband, mind, body, and soul.
And because Warren was the prophet, he decided who was marrying who, and he was the only person allowed to marry anyone in the church.
The prophet would just pick who you were going to marry. You could be 13 years old, marry a 92-year-old man. It was crazy. I always just prayed that I wouldn't marry someone that I couldn't have children with because they were too old. At the most 20 years older than me.
Also, because of the size of this town, Warren was able to control every other aspect as well. When someone did something that he didn't like, they were punished. Wives would be taken away, businesses would be taken away, houses would be taken away, and they'd all be given to other men more deserving. Everyone began to live in fear of Warren.
So the control that the church had really became very evident in my life pretty early on. My dad was deemed an unworthy man, and he had his power stripped away from him. My younger brothers and sisters and 2 of my dad's wives were taken away from him and moved 400 miles away to another community from the same church. My mother was given to another man as a wife, and then he became my father. And I was immediately just brought into this large family. And he had over 20 wives. He had 60 plus children in his home.
The reason that I can think of is why we were listening to my father when he was still in prison, like after he was put in prison, is through fear, through brainwash. We just believed. Some people didn't, some people questioned, and they were immediately sent away. So when you're sent away, then usually you go to a place where you live alone, all by yourself. The only contact you have with other humans, or are supposed to have with other humans, is the people who bring you groceries like once a month. And sometimes they would forget to bring you groceries, so you basically just starve. Being sent away can last like years, months, sometimes days, weeks, just whenever Father remembered that you were alive.
Men wanted to be as close to the highest degree of glory in heaven, so they wanted as many wives as possible. Warren's choices for who deserved the most wives were always men that were in place of power within the church. It didn't matter how old these men were and how young their wives would be. If Warren was getting what he wanted from you, he was giving you as many wives as possible.
It wasn't until after I left till I found out who Father was planning on for me to get married to, and it was my sister Rachel's husband. So basically all the men who married girls that were from the Jeffs family were the highest families up, like they meant the most to the FLDS. So I have a couple of sisters that are married to like this one man, and most of them had children by him, except like the youngest. She was married around 15, I think. She didn't have kids by him, I'm assuming because he was put in prison.
And while this is all problematic in my mind, what happened next is what really categorized Warren as a monster for me. The church is now operating almost entirely based on fear at this point. Everyone wanted to be righteous and pure, and everyone wanted to please the prophet to please God. Warren could get whatever he wanted, whatever God told him he should be doing, and he could decide when a woman or girl was ready for marriage.
In school, our training as women started as early as 4th grade, where we would have what was called home economic. And as we progressed in school with each grade, it was Warren Jeffs himself that was teaching the women this class on how to be women.
It's crazy the control this dude had over everyone. Marrying off underage girls wasn't entirely new in the FLDS, but with Warren in charge, it happened more than ever before.
I come from a family of 24 and had 3 moms. And as a woman inside of this religion, I was going to be a mother and have as many children as I could. And I knew that I was going to belong to a man who would have many wives.
But in 2004, cracks started to appear for good old Warren. Just 2 years after he had started to lead the FLDS, a civil suit was filed against him. He had purchased land in a small town in Texas with the hopes of having an FLDS community there. He referred to this as yearning for Zion, YVZ. Warren started to spend all his time down there in Texas, and he would ask specific people from Short Creek to come and join him in Texas to help begin building the community. Almost all the people of Short Creek wanted to be asked to join. Texas would be an exciting new adventure.
I think honestly it was just fun for him, because when he would take families apart, pull fathers away, or take the mothers and children apart, for years at a time, it wouldn't really benefit him other than make the people scared of him.
But while Warren was in Texas at YFZ, he started to feel that there were lead figures in Short Creek who had helped in building the community that were maybe starting to have more power than he wanted them to have. These men were high-ranking within the church, and they had a lot of influence on the community. After he had been away for months, Warren came back to Short Creek and held a meeting and said that God had given him a list, and that on this list were men who had been master deceivers, and they had committed many sins. In front of a big room full of church members, he tells 21 men that they are no longer a part of the FLDS. These men had disagreed with Warren Jeffs' leadership, and so he decided to get rid of them. He took away their houses, their businesses, and their wives and children to be given to other men. 4 of those men were Jeff's own brothers.
All of our lives really revolved around this concept that we were God's chosen people and that we were here to continue his work, and that everyone else was either an apostate or a Gentile. And a Gentile was the rest of the world, the people that had not been born into it or who had not converted into it. And the apostates were people that had had the opportunity to be given this gospel and this doctrine, and they had chosen out. They were considered the evil of the most evil.
Around the same time as the civil suit, Warren's nephew filed a lawsuit against him, claiming that Warren had relations with him and assaulted him when he was just a minor. And after that news broke out, Warren disappeared. He was on the run. He couldn't handle the accusations. Nothing screams guilty more than someone going on the run. People in his inner circle still had regular contact with him, and the church was still bankrolling his life while he was hiding in hotels. Warren was now on the FBI's top 10 most wanted. More allegations started to come through. Girls that had luckily found their way out of the church came forward to tell their story of their time at FLDS. They spoke about being underage, being forced to marry, forced relations, having no control of their own lives.
I'm 16 and 17 years old. I was feeling less than human. And through the process, there were so many times where I would just ask myself, what if you just ended it? But the way that I was cultured and raised, suicide is the ultimate sin. I realized nobody was going to protect me. And so the only way to protect myself was I would take my vehicle and I would sleep away from my husband. There was no hell on earth or in heaven that was as bad as the hell that I was feeling and experiencing.
Not only had Warren given girls away to marry old men left and right, but he was also aiding in incest, as one of the women filed a suit saying she had been forced to marry her first cousin at just 14 years old.
I would be told to be married at 14 years old. I finally found out who I was to be married to, and they were going to arrange me to be married to my first cousin. And it was someone that I had known my whole life and vehemently did not like. There was something about the energy between us that was just so difficult for me. I would feel the hair stand up on the back of my neck when he would come into my vicinity. And the idea of being married to him forever, to have his children, to that was my future. I couldn't do it. But I found myself standing in a hotel room in front of the leader, the prophet, who in my mind was God on earth. And I'm standing next to this man who is my cousin that I'm going to be married to. And I just, as the vows started being read, I started to sob. My whole body was just shaking because I was sobbing. I couldn't get myself to say I do. The words were caught in my throat.
Also around this time, the YFC were still trying to build their community. They were only recruiting for the purest people, and most of those people were children of leaders of the church. These children were taken from their homes, and usually their mothers in Short Creek, and sent to live with other families that were staying in Texas at YFC.
So my mom and me were not together most of my life because she was the caretaker of like 5 other girls, and my caretaker was a different mother that was in charge of me and 2 other girls. I personally got to be with my mom every day at 3 p.m. for 1 hour. That was about it until Father would like take us apart for a couple of years, bring us back together. Most of the time when she walked in the door, I didn't know who it was because we were like apart for so long. I was like, who's that? Like, that's your mother.
Warren was finally caught on August 28, 2006. In the vehicle that he had been riding in, police found 4 computers, 16 cell phones, different disguises including wigs and a ton of sunglasses, and more than $55,000 in cash. While Warren had been running and hiding, the cases were compounding against him. And as he waited for his trial to begin, federal agents were actually able to gain access to YFC. The church tried to deny any wrongdoing and any underage wives, but 468 kids were taken from the YFC ranch and were held by Child Protection Services until each legal guardian could come to pick them up. The FBI continued to dig. In a secret room in the church at YFC, they were able to locate boxes and boxes of church paperwork that had been clearly hidden. These boxes had paperwork accounting for every single marriage that had taken place within the church in Short Creek and YFC. Also in the box were audio recordings from Warren. They were recordings he had made at his multiple weddings. It featured his vows and also, the most disturbing part, the consummation of marriage to underage girls.
The first time that I ever was exposed to was so confusing. And I remember just shaking as a leaf and just begging it to stop because I didn't believe that what was happening was right.
I don't even know how it worked. I just knew that you got married and then you had children. So I figured it was just through kissing. But so I didn't know it was. My mom explained that to me a lot later.
It was reported that in total, he had 78 wives and over 60 children. Take a moment to let that sink in. Warren's trial began on September 11, 2007 in St. George, Utah. He was found guilty of 2 counts of being an accomplice to and was sentenced to 10 years to life in prison.
So my father's in prison for life plus 25 years. Basically, after he was put in prison, nothing happened. Things just went on as usual. He did appoint the first presidency to kind of make sure everything was carried out that he gave us permission to do or told us to do, all the messages and everything. And then he put these people called guiding elders, who were usually his brothers. You would have to get approval from them before you did anything or sent a package, simple things like that. So currently the church is still going on. There's a lot less people because more people have realized that it's just BS and have left, but it's still going on.
He began serving his sentence at the Utah State Prison, but on July 27, 2010, the Utah Supreme Court said that the jury wasn't given correct instructions, and so reversed Jeff's convictions and ordered a new trial. The court found that the trial judge should have told the jury that Warren could not be convicted unless he intended for one of the young girl's husbands to engage in non-consensual with her. He was then extradited to Texas. On August 9, 2011, Jeffs was convicted in Texas on 2 counts of sexual assault of a child and sentenced to life in prison. He'll be eligible for parole on July 22, 2038. Warren is now in prison, but he hasn't lost power over the FLDS church. Many members still consider him to be the prophet and receive sermons and songs by phone.
This is modern day America. How is this happening? The people of the FLDS are an example of that. I look at them and I see that their belief in one man, their belief in Warren Jeffs, and their belief in this doctrine is so strong that all of the evidence can be laid out in front of them and they disregard all of it. Because even during Warren's trial, he had a moment of sanity, I say, and he confessed that he was a fraud in front of his brother, in front of several people. And the recording of it was distributed in a lot of different places. And even with that, they still believe that that was a test to test their faithfulness.
You can tell anybody who wants to read this message or see the video that they can see it, even apostates and Gentiles, that they may know that I have been a liar, and the truth is not in me.
Warren has tried to hang himself more than once while he's been in jail. He was also taken to the hospital and put in an induced coma for excessive fasting.
He's actually in a mental psych ward of the prison, and he believes that me and my mom and my brother are immortal. So we live on, I think it's Mars or Venus. We can't do any wrong, so obviously all of a sudden we go from bad, the worst of the worst, because we're Warren Jeff's family who apostatized, big news, and now we're all these immortal people on Mars.
And that's the story of Warren Jeffs. It's hard to believe that one person is responsible for so many horrific crimes, and that he is still, to this day, believed to be good by his followers. I think it's sad that he's used fear in him to be able to exploit someone's faith. He's created so much lifelong trauma during his reign as president of the FLDS. I hope the members of the church that haven't already done so can one day recognize the tragedies that took place. Thanks for watching Killer Bites. I'm Brandi. See you next time.
My advice to people who are still in there, especially my family, is to just stop and think. Get the internet, search up things. Video evidence will not lie. And the things that Father has said in prison that is actually videoed, it's not going to lie.
I'm not the prophet. I never was the prophet.
You are the prophet.
Just a minute. The Lord's still dictating. This is not a test. This is a revelation from the Lord God of heaven through his former servant, who was never his servant, who is dictating these words at this time. You may know this is not a test. I say farewell again to all who qualify for Zion. Farewell.
We love you. We love you. We love you.